So can you negotiate with people accused of undermining talks with violent acts? Can you negotiate if the people meant to be working in unity are at loggerheads? Let's speak now to Vlok, a specialist from the Conflict Resolution Centre. Good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us. I mean, there's a lot of moving parts here. So what is your assessment of the way these negotiations have played out so far?
Sally, it's a very complex conflict. It's unfortunately, I thought we were making progress in the last few days, but I think with the minister's statement, that clip you just ran, I think we're taking a few steps back. I'm not sure that we're headed in the right direction.
We also heard Jordan Hill-Lewis saying yesterday, I will not negotiate with a gun to my head. I'm not going to negotiate with people involved in violence. The truth is this does sometimes have to happen, that you may suspect that someone's involved in some sort of act of sabotage, but you have to negotiate. Or do you? I mean, talk to me about that. Can you actually negotiate when one party is suspected of sabotage?
Generally, again, with a complex conflict like this one, there are nuances to bear in mind. But as a general rule, no, you shouldn't. Anything that gives off a sense of appeasement, of compromise in this situation at this time is certainly not a good conflict strategy.
Sure, it might not be a good strategy, but it certainly happens. I mean, if you think back to the strike at Eskom, I think it was last year, the allegations were out there that there were union members stoking the fires of causing problems at the plants to make sure things were even more chaotic. But those negotiations continued and were resolved in the union's favour by and large. So what do we do?
It's a question of timing, really. If I think the city and they're getting there, it's crucial that to answer your question about do we negotiate with people or not, you should only a situation like this involving people and their livelihoods, you should negotiate in an environment of stability. That's got to be established first. And if that means that you refuse to negotiate with people in that period of time, then that is certainly the safest. We see that in Africa and Eastern Europe. If you negotiate with people arriving at meetings with AK-47s, then you're really just kicking the can down the road, and you're not resolving it. You're not transcending the problem. You're putting a plaster on it, and it's going to pop up again, as we see with this Cape Town, with the transport problem. It's a cyclical conflict. The city, to a large extent, that they continue to deal with the symptoms of the problem as opposed to the causes of the problem. And that is why we'll have this discussion again next year and the year after that.
So what is the cause? What is the cause of the problem?
Well, I recently wrote an article on it, and it really is a complex problem. It absolutely, it's a multi-level problem, and it's going to need a multi-level solution. It involves the economy, it involves spatial planning, it involves our past, it involves a long list of unresolved South African conflicts. It resolved our inability to deal with conflict, and it involves pure criminality, as we see. So there's different levels here, there's different parties. We tend to see it as a binary problem. It's not. It involves a multitude of parties, of interests, of agendas, and I'm not sure that we always focus on that correctly.
Yeah, you talk about the problem of binary, that sort of polarizing effect. But when you've got polarizing problems within what's meant to be one side acting as a united front, you've got the transport minister, taking pot shots at the City of Cape Town's mayor, also at JP Smith, and then the city's hitting back saying, actually, she doesn't know the law. That becomes a mini fight in its own. I mean, it's almost a play within a play. How do you, surely, am I right, in terms of how you sort this big mess out, would you start by dealing with that fracture on the side of the people who are meant to be working together in this issue? Where would you begin to deal with this?
It's not so much a side issue, Sally. I think it's a part of the problem. It is people who, for political ends, look at how our politicians speak to each other. There's no respect here. There's no dignity. They dug in and they're taking pot shots at each other. How does this resolve the conflict? How does this level of insult and disrespect? It really is. It's a huge part of the problem, and this is why how the minister thinks that aids the resolution of this is a problem, and our politicians often, and I'm not just talking about Cape Town now, but I think the city's doing pretty well. But we see that everywhere. Our politicians step in and they make matters worse. It's a rarity to find our politicians stepping in and making a conflict better.
I mean, and you talk about that, the reality is we are less than a year probably away from a general election. So I would imagine the temptation from all sides to politicize this is always present.
Again, at the cost of the people who...
Exactly. So you tell me, I mean, I'm coming to you for answers. And it's just, what I'm hearing is that it's really complex. But is the first step to try and build trust? Or does trust only come after people have made a few compromises? Where do you start in this?
Trust is such a difficult thing to rebuild, and that's one of our unresolved South African conflicts. And we're talking about Cape Town now, but it's a South African problem. We simply don't trust each other. We walk into our conflicts with all these preconceived notions of who you are and how you think and what you say and what you want and what you stand for. And speaking of steps, in that article of mine, I set out 10 steps, very practical steps, which I think the city should, anyone in this type of conflict should try and apply. And trust is one of the 10. Where at some level, and the best way to rebuild trust is to take those small steps. This is a cyclical conflict. It's a generational conflict. It's been how long have we been having the Cape Town taxi problem discussion? Is it 20 odd years? You need to show progress, small bits of progress, small little victories for everyone. That includes everyone. And then you need to build on that. Our politicians, our leaders, we resolve things, and in the next day or 3 or 4, we're going to read about calm returning to Cape Town, and people may say they're sorry, and there'll be 1 or 2 prosecutions. And at the end of the day, we really didn't resolve it. We're ignoring it. And we're taking a deep breath, and we just want life to go on.
You say,
and we didn't deal with it. And trust is a part of it.
And of course, the more we kick these problems, sorry to jump in, the more we kick the can down the road and really solving these deep problems, the less trust there is. So trust is a crucial issue. I would imagine listening to each other is important. Just run through some of the top tips that, if you could speak to the people involved in this negotiation, that you'd say to them.
I am speaking to some of them, but progress is slow. The steps would include, if you're talking about specifically talking about trust, stop scoring likes and votes by insulting each other. You can really play a hard game. You can stand up for your side and your people without all the insults, without the disrespect. Give the city I find it ironic that people are complaining about their rights being stepped on. And they break every rule in the book on the way there. Give the city that stability. Give them calm so that you can negotiate. At this stage, there's very little sympathy for the taxi operators, because it would be so simple to negotiate at a negotiating table. They're making that difficult. So give each other small little gestures of trust, of respect, of dignity, and that's the way, slowly and surely, build something small that works this time, that lasts, that's sustainable. And then you build on that. There's a lot of structural issues involved as well. You know, the way that the very structure of the taxi industry needs a lot of work in itself. The way
Yeah.
that people are paid, the routes, all of those things. So, but certainly, step by step, what is frustrating is that this problem, as complex and as harmful as it is so fixable. It is so unnecessary. We can compare our position to several case studies in South America, for example. All of the answers for all of these things that our leaders and our politicians are telling us are insurmountable and intractable problems and conflicts are not. They are fixable. And we don't have to give in to criminals. You can, especially on social media, everyone's upset about, yeah, but you can't let them get away with this. Of course you can't. Of course, the rule of law, the mayor is quite right. The rule of law is paramount here. We have to start there. But then we have to build on that. And it's not good enough to clamp down and get an interdict and so on. We need to build from there. It's an interdict, police with guns, that's not the end game yet. That's the start. That should be the first step, an unnecessary step. But okay, under these circumstances, we should start there. And that is often where we stop resolving it. That is seen as the end of the line, while it should be the beginning of it.
Yeah,
and that's where, with all respect to all involved, that is where this conflict is terribly mismanaged, time and time again for decades.
Yeah, because as soon as the immediate conflict is over, quelled by some police with guns, it's sort of patted over, as you say, and on we move until it comes around again. And you make a good point, because this is where we see the same problem with our zama-zamas. The actual problem is not fully, properly, finally resolved. So it flares up again and increases a lack of trust between communities and the authorities. Thank you so much for speaking to us this evening. Certainly does seem like a very complex conversation and process that needs to happen. That was Andre Vlok. He's a conflict resolution negotiator. But let's stay with